American water polo.
Hi, this is Damon Newman from American Water Polo. We're here today with Scott Voltz to learn some of our best practices from our experienced officials in our Behind the Whistle series. How you doing, Scott?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm doing good. I appreciate the time.
You bet.
Hey, so tell me about yourself and how you got started officiating.
So as far as I'm concerned, grew up in Michigan. Started playing water polo because my sister's boyfriend played, and I ended up got dragged to a game, to
Okay.
see the sister's boyfriend, and I was like, oh, this is cool. So started playing in middle school, and then started refereeing actually as a sophomore in high school. Just the Michigan high school girls season, because the boys are in the fall, girls are in the spring. So my sophomore year, we were on the bus, and my coach said, they're looking for officials for girls in the spring. Is anyone interested? And I said, I'm interested. And he kind of looked at me like, you can't drive. How are you going to get to a game? So my mom drove me to games. And that's kind of how I got started reffing. It was not real good reffing, but it was a foot in the door. And then I just had a bunch of people along the way help me out from within the state of Michigan. And then when I coached at Michigan State, I knew the referees from the coaching side. And then when they found out I used to ref or ref, somewhat, they asked me to be a part of that. So Big Ten Club, Perry Corbacus was big with that. And then the more I did that, I got opportunities with CWPA and just kind of went on from there. Now I live out in California, just moved out here about 7 months ago, 8 months ago. That's good.
We're in right now.
Flying a little bit here in the COVID times, but and so trying to get back into it when it all opens back up,
Yeah,
whenever that may be.
that's excellent. Well, you've started a lot earlier than some other people. That's great to hear. I didn't realize that about yourself.
I mean, it's limited. I think I called like
Because,
5 games.
yeah, you started blowing the whistle. You started seeing the game, I guess, from a different perspective, right?
I got used to getting yelled at very young by coaches. Yeah.
So speaking of like officiating, what are some of the things you do when you typically arrive on deck?
So when I show up on deck, the first thing I kind of look at is just the overall setup of the pool. Are we looking at, a shallow, deep pool, as may be the case in some sites? Is there a big deck space? Are the fans right on top of you? Where are the benches? All of those things. So that's just kind of my first general thing when I walk on the deck. And then I go over and check in with the people at the desk and just kind of say hi. If I'm not changed already, go change and come back. And then I start walking around and making sure cones are where they need to be, the benches where it needs to be. Then I check with the table and make sure they've got the books and that the people who are working know what they're doing, or at least we can get by with it. But my first thing is always just kind of like a big picture. What are we looking at for the day or for the game? And then I settle into, okay, where are my markers? Where are those things? Is there a pole that I'm going to run into? Can I back up the lifeguard stand? Otherwise, I will fall in the pool when I run into the lifeguard stand.
Excellent.
It has happened. I haven't fallen in, but I've run into them pretty hard.
Yeah, I think we've all been there. A couple of a slip here, it could have easily have happened.
Ooh, yes, indeed.
Yeah, there are some slippery decks out there. I even that Princeton deck, I'm sure that one just comes to mind. How slippery that deck is just walking on street shoes.
Yes. Well, and then I was at
a game that's like pretty intense. You have to be really on it.
Yeah. I was at Loyola Marymount in a game that was kind of a big one, and I had walked and I hadn't noticed that they had a game clock right in the middle of the pool on the deck. And so first quarter, I turned and I was getting like someone had broken out and I was out of position, and I was trying to go quickly, and I took it right on the shin, and like almost fell over, kicked the thing, and it fell over, but not into the pool, which was good.
Yeah.
But I had to get checked out. Like I had to get wrapped up by the trainer because I was bleeding and I was wearing, yeah. So that was exciting. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's a hard lesson to learn, I guess.
Right. Like, come on, trainer, can you wrap me up? Cause I'm bleeding from running into a clock. Felt really good. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It was really a proud moment in my reffing career.
So talk to me about a little bit about collaboration. Obviously that has changed over the time, right? A lot of emphasis being placed on that. Probably a lot different than when you were hearing as a sophomore in high school. Um,
Yeah.
so, like, what does that sound like? When you collaborate with your partner, what is a coverage conversation? What does that sound like? Whether it's an experienced official or maybe even also a novice official.
So I think it's very different if it's an experienced official or it's a novice official. And I think for good reason. I think when I'm the novice official or the less experienced official or was in the past, I always liked to make sure that my partner knew what was going on so nothing new jumped out at me. And when you get to be kind of the more experienced official, if you're going into a big game and you know your partner is going to have to work really hard, you try to make it as easy on them as possible. And so for me personally, what I like to do is say, hey, what do you like to do for coverage with a novice official, and see what they have to say. And if it makes sense, then great. Okay, cool. And I can cover more space or whatever. But if they start saying things that are a little bit like, yeah, and then you just take the whole counterattack and I'll just defend, watch this person be like, okay, well, maybe we can expand on that a little bit. And why don't you focus on these two groups instead of just one, or, but with a novice or a newer official, I like to get them in their comfort zone as much as possible. And as the game wears on, we can kind of elaborate on that or expand on that. I think when it comes to other communication, like between quarters and things like that, I personally try to let the other person drive it a little bit. If it's something that I have seen that I think maybe they're missing, I might say something to the extent of like hey, did you keep an eye on number 14 white and 7 blue or whatever, let's see if we can, it looks like maybe there's something going on there. And I certainly don't want to call it at your feet. Just if you have to focus on them, I can expand my coverage a little bit so that you can really focus on that group so that we don't have anybody get injured. Because, as that's got to be the top priority.
Right, exactly.
And it isn't always. So I try to kind of let them talk about the coverage, and I've worked with enough different referees to know, like, some people really don't want you stepping in their water. Some people really want you to call everywhere, like their water, that old saying. So, you got to be a little bit flexible with that. And with the newer referees, I try to let them do as much of it as I can. The other thing is I always try to be on their team. And I because I know how it's been to be thrown under the bus by fellow officials in one way or another, whether it's they make calls that you're like, what? And they're like joking with the coaches, or if you're wearing headsets and you hear them say things, I know how demoralizing and dejecting that can be. So I try to always just be like, if a coach has to say something, I always say, he probably saw it differently. Let's go, we'll talk about it. And then I give them the answer straight up. Or when I'm walking away, say, hey, the coach is going to want to talk to you about that call because of what they were just saying. Just be ready for it. So that, keep it in your mind.
Right.
So
yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
The headsets are a godsend. If you can use them, anyone should if they have the opportunity, in my opinion. Yeah,
it is a great piece of technology. I would say, even I was talking to somebody the other day and they were talking about they were in a situation where the game was so loud and so intense that they had headsets on, but they still couldn't hear.
Yeah. You gotta love that.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, those are always fun.
Right. Or I've worn them too, and they haven't been the best ones, and they're going in and out. And I'm sure you probably had that same situation too. And you're like, okay, well, I had the headsets, but now we don't have them, so you have to go back to square one.
Yes, where you're in the game and they suddenly give out and you're like pointing, like do this. I'm a big fan of hand signals too, like you take that, or I've got this, or whatever. Even with headsets, I still fall into that trap. So
yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So we talked a little bit about how small the water polo community is, coaches and officials and colleagues. You probably know people throughout the years. What's your advice on how to navigate those interpersonal relationships that you probably have but remain professional at the same time?
That's a good one, and I think some people would argue that it hasn't always remained professional. There have been you always have relationships with coaches and like that. I think the biggest thing for me is respect. And it took me a few years to kind of just, coming up through it to realize, like, they're not yelling at me because I'm Scott necessarily. They're yelling at me because their job, their livelihood depends on their team doing well, or their team succeeding, or their players staying healthy, or whatever it may be. So I think if you can understand that, and understand where coaches are coming from, understand where other officials are coming from, I think it's just a better world. I think we all want the game to go perfectly well. Every coach, every ref, every player wants the game to go well, whether or not that means winning or losing. I mean, obviously everyone wants to win, but if you can kind of approach that idea of respect, and then saying to coaches, I hear you, and this is what I saw on it, and it's okay to agree to disagree, as long as it stays professional and there is that respect, then I'm good with it. I think the issues that coaches would say that I have, is that when I feel that there's disrespect, then I feel like a line has been crossed, and then we go yellow card or red card. And so if it's a respectful conversation and it's kept to where my mom could listen in and not blush or be mad, then I'm good with whatever. And again, like I said, everybody's just trying to make, the game go as well as they can, the sport be as successful as they can, and then, maintain their own livelihood in it.
Right. So what are some ways you've done that? You talked about respect and kind of a mutual, two-way street between officials and coaches. What's some techniques you've maybe seen or heard or even used to kind of disarm, potentially a volatile situation? We both know that, coaches are sometimes looking for cards or looking to make a statement, right? But what are some ways you've learned to kind of disarm those?
That's a good question. I don't know if I've even wrapped my head around it fully yet. I think the ability to walk away is a really good thing.
And that's true too, right? In a lot of
and the ability to let a coach have at you for a second, because in that second they're hot. And again, as long as they keep things professional and say, okay, walk away, or say, hey, I'll catch back up with you about that. We can talk about it later. They never want to talk about it later. Just as a point of reference, you can say that. They never want to talk about it. They just want to yell at you right then. No, it's a good thing. The ability to say, hey, let's talk back about that, not in the heat of the moment or the game's going on. Other things I've done is I've been told that sometimes I get defensive, and I'll sit there and I'll get my arms like this and come across as defensive, even though I'm not trying to.
Right.
So just some body language things. I had someone say, you never cross your arms ever. You just look angry. So if you have to feel like you have to cross your arms, hold your whistle. You can do this whole thing. And that looks less defensive than this. Obviously from the camera angle, this looks very, it's weird. But anyhow, so some of the body language things, and then just, I always try to go back after a game and say, okay, we have to, with NCAA and with CWPA and AWP, report red cards. Why did this red card happen? What could I have done differently to prevent that from happening? Sometimes there's nothing. Like you said, sometimes a coach wants a red card, and they'll tell you they want a red card. But other times, there are ways it could be avoided.
Right. Yeah, I think that's it's really true. And body language and walking away is never easy, right? Sometimes. So I think that's a pretty good piece of advice.
Yeah. If you hear anybody crying in the background, it's just a baby. It's not. I'm not. There's no one else here, and it's not me. I promise. He just got shots yesterday, so he's sad.
Oh, brother, I hear you. That's not easy. So, what's the toughest part of the game to officiate and why?
I think decorum, it can be the toughest thing, and I think it depends on the level. I think the typical high school game, your typical early season college game, or even age group, whatever, for the most part, you're going to have your occasional flare up. But when things start getting like end of the season, they start being championship type things. That idea that punishing someone harshly has a huge impact on their entire team and the outcome of their team, is something you have to consider. I think, does the punishment fit the crime? And sure, if it's a big crime, it could be a big punishment. But I think, as officials, we get into this habit of so-and-so is just causing trouble. Let's keep an eye on him and let's clean that up. Well, as the games get more serious and more have bigger consequences or bigger results, you got to, you're still applying the rules as written, especially for college, but it's a little bit more of a delicate game. I think center is getting tougher. Center position is getting tougher because everyone's getting so much smarter. We're trying to keep up, but someone once told me that, players practice 2 to 3 hours, 5 to 7 days a week, and you referee 2 games a couple times a week. It's just not the same. They're working to figure out how to beat you the entire time. So centers are very, very good at it. I like the new rules as far as transition, that you can call something behind the play and you don't have to bring the ball all the way back. That whole thing of where the ball's going at, the ball's being outletted and you want to exclude the former center, now center defender for pulling, but you don't want to kill the counterattack. Instead, the physicality just arises.
Right.
I think the fact that that's changed helps clean things up a little bit. But again, that kind of goes back to the decorum and the physicality, because, man, it can just snowball so fast. And so I think if I was giving one bit of advice for one area to focus on, it's just keeping control, if that makes sense.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So you've worked a number of high-level games, whether it's college club, whether it's varsity, whether it's, even club games. Do you have one that sticks out in your mind that's memorable for, whether it's a good reason or something that's a learning experience?
There are some learning experiences.
You knocked yourself from the leg at the LMU.
That one rings a bell.
Yeah.
I think probably the game that sticks out most was actually an international game, which was kind of fun because it was 17-16 final score.
Okay.
And the last goal was scored with 0.8 seconds for a corner throw. So it was a corner throw with 0.8 seconds, and the guy just grabbed it and threw it towards the center, and the center reached up and redirected it into the cage. And also it was Serbia-Croatia. They don't like each other. And it was in this middle of nowhere city. The team was training in Brno, Serbia. Don't spend a lot of time looking it up. You won't find a whole lot. It's a mining town. I think the population's like 500 or 300 or something like that. But I'm pretty sure every single one of those people was in the stands. So it was just this cool, this relaxed, atmosphere for all these games. And then all of a sudden there's 500 people behind you screaming, and it's the 16-17 game. And there were 25, 30 exclusions, and there were no arguments from anyone on a single one. And it was just the most beautiful game. And it was a youth tournament. But it was really cool. That one just at the end of the game, even though Serbia lost, and so people were bummed, but there was just such a buzz and atmosphere of this is what the game was meant to be like and what it should be. So,
right. Yeah, that sounds pretty special.
I mean, no one could believe that last goal went in. But when it did, I was like, cool, I'm out. This was awesome. I just want to leave before anything happens. And everyone was cool except the Serbian coaches, not at us, but they swam their team for an hour and a half afterward while other games were going on in the little area behind the goal, just screaming at them. They were so mad. It was pretty fun. It's pretty fun to watch that. Be like, oh, been there, been on that end of that thing before.
If you're looking back on your all the knowledge, all the experience you have, what are some pointers you maybe would give, a younger version of yourself, things to focus on, some things to avoid?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing would be to listen to people, whether it's coaches or officials. I mean, officials, it's easy, right? I mean, I've gotten more useful advice from Michael Goldenberg, Joe Pila, Alex Stankiewicz, those guys. I mean, it's great pieces of advice, and it's really easy to hear that, and you try to take it all in. But I think I'd listen to coaches because they, like I said, they're practicing all the time. It's their profession. They're working 40 hours, 60 hours, 80 hours a week on it. So whether it's whether you agree with what they're saying or you don't agree with what they're saying, listen to what they have to say. And I think I don't think I didn't listen to them necessarily, but I think I would just try to listen more, if that makes sense. Like if I was doing it all over again, not necessarily agree, but just hear everything they have to say, because there's so much value in it, and there's people that have been around for so long. And then also, I mean, outside of that, I mean, and then you look at people like Dan Sheridan is a great example. He has said some things to me that I've been like, oh yeah. And then I walk away and like an hour later, I'm like, oh, epiphany. He just said something so amazing, because he's been around for so long, doing so much more than people give him credit for, more than people know about. Mike Schofield as a referee now. I mean, he coached at Navy for how long? I mean, even if you don't agree with what his call is or with someone's call or whatever Dan said, when you walk away, if you really sit there and think about it, there's just so much in it. And there's so much value.
There's a lot of knowledge to be gained, a lot of, it's a growth mindset really, and garnering that kind of stuff from people who have a ton of experience can only be helpful.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Like I said, take what you want from it, but hear it all.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Scott, I appreciate the time, spending the time talking about water polo. This is Damon Newman from American Water Polo. Check us out on AmericanWaterPolo.org. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram. Check out any interviews and other educational resources.